Yes. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have Tanny McGregor with us today. She is doing a series for us on her book, Comprehension Connections, which is one of my favorite books of hers. When I contacted her this summer about doing Ink and Ideas, I didn't realize that she had written that book as well, and it was already one of my favorites. What I love about this book is it's a great it teaches you as a teacher how to make those kind of abstract concepts that students struggle with sometimes, how to make those a little bit more concrete for your students so that they understand those. So tonight, Tanny is going to talk with us about metacognition, and that's thinking about our thinking. And so Jill, were you able to get into the agenda? Does everybody else being able to get into the agenda? Because we have in the chat that someone's not being able to get in.
I can't click on it all. I'm clicking on all of them, and I feel like I don't know what I'm doing because I can't.
Are other people able to get into the agenda? Yeah, everybody else is.
Okay,
I'll see what I can do, Jill. I'll send it to you via email. How about that?
Thanks.
Okay.
And I've got a comment on Scott's comment in the chat that, Scott, I'm assuming you're saying you've been on a Jesse Stewart kick for 6 months or so. Is that right? Yes, me too. And when the first time that I got invited to go to Greenup, I was so excited. Like, I was excited to meet the teachers, but really I was excited to go like to the Jesse Stewart Lodge, and they have like a room with all his books and different like artifacts and stuff. And then after the workshop was over, my husband and I got in the car and we found back the little lanes up in the holler where his house was. And oh my gosh, it was so fun because one of my favorite books really of all time in any genre is Thread That Runs So True. And I have a couple different versions, a couple different covers of that book on my bookshelf. So I'm with you. It's really fascinating what he did in his life.
All righty. Well, Tanny, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you. Okay. I don't think there's much on the active agenda today in terms of any hyperlinks or any resources per se. There is a shared Google folder that has materials from all of Tanny's sessions. So you may want to access that, or I don't know if you put anything in there for that today or not. So there are some things in that Google folder that is linked on your agenda. So Tanny will tell us when we need to go there, and I will turn it over to her.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and just so you know, Kay, I went into that folder today and I was going to try to make some subfolders and organize it a little bit because since we've been together a few times, I've just been tossing things in there and I don't think I have permission to do that. So anyway, we can talk about that later. But for those of you who are going into that Google resource folder right now, it just looks like, at least for me, what I see is just a big old long list that's not in any order, but we'll get that neatened up for you. So thank you for being here. I'm like so excited that so many people joined, and like I think you already know from Kay, we're going to shorten this session and we're going to make it uniform so that all of these strategies from Comprehension Connections, we're going to take about an hour. So it's really about an hour for each chapter as we move through the book. And if you have a copy of the book, we're not going exactly in order, but today we have to start with metacognition because that's the only place to start. And that's after the introductory chapter in my book, like metacognition had to come first. So in each of these sessions in this series, this is good. This series is going to take us all the way up through, I think it's March 11th. And these series are at this same time, 4:30 to 5:30, after school until the March 11th date. And then we have a half day in the morning. And we'll look at 3 strategies that day and wrap up the book. So I'm excited about the structure of it and that we have a little time in between each session to think about our strategies and try it out. And this is really a perfect way to approach informational text and I think any content area teacher would be able to find little ways to approach these strategies, like Kay said, that are going to feel very concrete and real to kids instead of just this abstract language that we toss around all the time, expecting kids to be able to think that's meaningful somehow. And when you think about a concept like metacognition, I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't even learn what that was until I was in college. So I took an ed psych class. It was my very first college class at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And I remember learning about metacognition from my instructor, and he brought this idea to life for me that we can actually think about our own thinking. And I was fascinated by it. He was such a good teacher anyway. So that I've always been interested in this topic, and the more I learn about it, the more important I know it really is. So we will use the chat a couple of times during this hour. And just so you know that, most of the time I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. And so if there's ever any trouble with, audio or you seeing, right now you should be able to see my screen. Just let Kay know, or go into the chat or unmute your mic and let us know. We want this to be the best experience that it can be for you. So if, I believe that, and okay, thank you. So I believe that in our time that we've been working together, this is how it's gone. And I'm saying this just to say that I know that there are some of you who've been with me for every single session, and others who maybe made one but not the other, and then still other people who maybe this is your very first time joining me for an in-person or a virtual session. And I have no way of knowing, who's been where and learned what along with me. But each of the sessions won't have much overlap, just so you know. It's new content every time, with the exception of maybe just some general, umbrella type ideas to tie things together for us each time. So there's comprehension connections on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And when we were together first with this cadre, Aspire Achieve, we looked at ink and ideas and sketchnoting, just like what I did with Greenup County High School students today. And then we also, when we were in person together a few weeks back, we did a little bit with visual literacy and vocabulary too. But the rest of this series is going to zero in on comprehension, and really comprehension across disciplines, across content areas, grade levels. So it doesn't matter if you are a special educator or a social studies teacher, ELA teacher, etc. I'm confident that there will be ideas here for you. So I always love to open with a picture book, and I believe that when we were together in person, I shared a picture book with you at the end called Artful Reading, but typically I'll share one at the beginning. And I have to share this picture book with you because it is my favorite picture book of all time, and that's saying something, because I'm a picture book fanatic and I collect them, and I'm always looking for something that's going to be able to stand in the gap for me, I think, to help me express important ideas to kids in ways that I might not otherwise be able to. And so this book, The Golden Rule, means a lot to me on a personal level, and as well, we used it in my school district in a special way. Personally, it automatically makes me think of my grandpa, who was born in Pulaski County and lived there his whole life, and he had cattle and he raised tobacco, and he was an important part of my life. And he always talked about the Golden Rule. I have a big family and lots of cousins, many of whom I haven't ever met yet. But in the summertime, I would go down from Cincinnati and spend time on their farm. And it was a common occurrence for my granddad to pull the grandkids out to the porch after supper and give us a little talking to about something. And so little sermonettes. And he would often talk about the Golden Rule. And in my family, I remember reciting it. So when I found out there was a picture book about the Golden Rule, you better believe I had to have it. And I cry easily anyway, and I remember tearing up at the very end of this book. I won't do that today because I've read the book so many times. But it is a really special book to me. I didn't know, however, that the Golden Rule's been around for thousands of years and that it's present in many cultures and religions around the world. So this book was fascinating to me from that point of view. And so, if you don't mind, we'll just take a couple of minutes just so that you can become acquainted with and enjoy this book as well. And even though I have the pages scanned in for you to see, I'm going to be reading from the real book myself. And we'll hope I'm coordinated enough to do that and not get confused along the way, which has been known to happen. After we read the book, I'll tell you how we used it in the schools where I work here in Cincinnati. So enjoy the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. A boy and his grandfather stood on a city sidewalk looking up at the words printed on a billboard. Grandpa, what does that say? The boy asked. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. People all over the world call those words the Golden Rule. What does it mean? The boy wanted to know. And why is it golden? It means this. Treat people the way you would like to be treated. It's golden because it's so valuable and a way of living your life that's so simple, it shines. Grandfather led the boy to another billboard farther down the sidewalk. Some people put the Golden Rule another way. Do nothing to other people that you would not like having done to you. Either way, he said, it's a very good rule. Who's it for? The boy asked. You, me, anyone can practice the Golden Rule. A rule that's the same for children and grown-ups? Same rule. Well, there aren't too many rules like that. Very few. And it's for people everywhere? Everywhere. Whatever their religion, people find the idea of the Golden Rule in their holy books, Grandfather said. Christianity says you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Judaism says what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow humans. Islam says, looks like I might be missing a page here. No. Islam says, hurt no one so that no one may hurt you. And Hinduism says this is the sum of duty, to do nothing to others which would cause them pain. Buddhism says, do not do to others what would hurt you. The Shawnee tribe says, do not kill or injure your neighbor. For it is not he or she that you injure yourself. The boy and his grandfather sat on a park bench. So, Grandpa, how can I start to practice the Golden Rule? You begin by using your imagination. My imagination? You imagine how someone else feels. For instance, a new child who's joining your class, how do you think that boy or girl is feeling? New kids always look scared. Would you be scared if it was you? Oh, yes. Well, what would make you feel better? If someone smiled at me. So, to practice the Golden Rule, you would smile at the new kid? You're right. You've got it. I bet you can think of other ways you'd like to be treated and ways you wouldn't want to be treated. How do you feel when you're teased or bullied? Sad? Yes. Mad? Yes. Small. I feel small. Sad, mad, small. Do you like feeling like that? No. Well, neither does anyone else. The boy thought for a moment about the Golden Rule. I see. There are lots of things I can do. I should tell the truth because I don't like being lied to. I want people to listen to me, so I should listen to other people. When I'm sick or when I'm tired, sometimes I need help, so I should offer my help to those who need it. You're getting the idea, Grandfather nodded. The boy looked at his grandfather. Practicing the Golden Rule seems like it could be hard. I said it was simple. I didn't say it would always be easy. Grandpa, the boy said, the Golden Rule is a very big thing, isn't it? It's very big and very small and very old. It's been around for thousands of years. Thousands of years? Well then, I don't think everyone is practicing it the way they should. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many problems between people, between countries. You're right, my boy. I wonder how things would change if everyone lived by the golden rule. I think people would be nicer, kinder. They'd act better toward their families and friends and even strangers. What if countries lived by the golden rule? Grandfather asked. Well, then people wouldn't want to hurt each other because they don't like being hurt. Maybe there wouldn't be wars. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Wonderful, Grandpa. But you can't make everyone in the world practice the golden rule. There's only one person you can ask to do that. Me? You. It begins with you. Well, now you can see why I love that book so much. In my school district, we decided to use this book in one of those one school, one book type experiences. Maybe your school does this, or maybe it's your grade level or your department. I've seen it done in all kinds of configurations. As you probably know, most universities have a one school, one book kind of experience for incoming freshmen. I have 4 daughters. Each of them went to a different university, and they all had some experience like this where all of their underclassmen, for example, are reading the same title, and then the author comes to visit campus type thing. So we got a hold of as many of these books as we could, and we tried to make sure that our students were exposed to this book in a read aloud, intimate kind of setting during the first week of school. And for many of our school campuses, this became like the mantra for the year and a theme that teachers carried into their own personal classrooms, into communications that went home to parents. I have several principals who took the book jacket off the book and framed it and put it in their office. And I, in fact, have a framed copy of the book jacket in my laundry room in my house, just as a reminder about going out into the world and remembering how important the golden rule is. So it sounds a little cheesy, but I really do love this book, and I think it's all because of my grandpa, really. So each time we're together, I'll use one picture book. Sometimes it'll echo like the importance of the particular strategy. This one I just had to share because I think it has such a great social studies connection, of course. And I think it is such, it treats cultures and religions so fairly the way the book is, the message is articulated. So perhaps you might think of a way you might be able to use that title somehow. So my contact information is here. It was not on the first slide, I don't believe. I am on Twitter at Tanny McG, and I know many of us have connected already. You can find me on the web at www.tannymcgregor.com. It's just a Google site, has a lot of my work on it. And then if you want to reach out to me in between sessions, feel free to do that. And you can find me at tannymcgregor@gmail.com. And you can get any of that information from Kay at any time. So I'd like for you just to look at this chart from Regi Routman, and I'll be quiet for a moment and let you just take a look at it and think about it. Now, when I see something that Regi Routman has written or published, I always take note. I feel like I've been learning from her for such a long time, and I feel like she's such a teacher's teacher. And when I looked at this from the book Read, Write, Lead, I could almost tell you the time periods in my career when I was either on the left-hand side or the right-hand side as far as my teaching practice goes. I mean, there are definitely times when I've been resource-driven, where my beliefs got sort of buried underneath everything else that was going on. For example, when I first started teaching and I barely had any materials, but there have been other times in my career, and I know you know what I mean about this, like when it's all aligned for you, when you know what you believe, you're planning accordingly and you have resources to support that, that's where the magic happens. Those are the days when I drive home from school and feel so much joy about my job. But sometimes those things get out of whack, and for lots of reasons that are sometimes beyond our control. I hope that in this series, from now through the middle of March, that you're going to feel more solid about what you believe about comprehension as a result of spending time together, looking at these strategies. And that in turn helps you figure out those little tweaks you want to make to your lesson design, and even what resources you think would be best to help kids become deeper thinkers. So I love this chart in its simplicity. I think it really is complex and has helped me reflect upon what it is that makes me feel satisfied in my work as a teacher, and also helps me to deliver to kids what I know they deserve. I love this little icon. I use it quite a bit in slides and projects, and it just reminds me of a book by Mike Schmoker. And at the very end, it was Results Now. At the very end of the book, he talks about meeting with a high school English department, I believe it was, and how they talked about the difference between like mandates or things that come down from like the federal government or the state or even in your own district, and the difference between that and these sort of organic agreements that you come to as professionals. And I really know the power of that because I believe what Doug Reeves says right here. If we've learned anything from our research, it's that practices endure while programs fade. My husband and I write little songs together sometimes. Sometimes they're just funny little songs for special occasions, like if someone's retiring or if something in our school district is going on and they want, a song. And so a few years back, we wrote a little song with all of the acronyms in it that are used. And we tried to use as many of the acronyms as possible. And there's always an abundance in education. And we just looked at that song the other day. And over the past 20 years or so, almost all of those acronyms have faded away. IEP was still there, and there were a couple others that were still there, but most of them have gone by the wayside and been replaced by other acronyms. And so it just made me think about this quote from Doug Reeves, that the things that last, the things that matter the most are these practices that we value and keep refining over the life of our career. And I know that to be true. You've probably seen this Venn diagram before if you've been in one of my other workshops. I might show it more often all the way through other times because it's the underpinning for all these strategies. It's the recognition that kids' thinking is the most important ingredient in the instructional recipe, and that if kids know how to merge their thinking in with what the author has to say, or what the artist had to draw, or what the musician had to compose, then that makes it real and meaningful and lasting. And so we're going to look at metacognition, and you could define it in a lot of different ways, but the most simple way would just be to say that it's a reflective practice where you're thinking about your own thinking, maybe knowing yourself as a reader, or knowing yourself as a historian or a writer or a mathematician, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses. We could even extend this into athletics. The best players are metacognitive. They know themselves and their abilities and strengths and weaknesses, and they spend time reflecting on their performance last week or the last match or game so that they can improve. I think we use metacognitive practices in a lot of places, a lot of situations in life, but I sometimes think we're not always realizing that metacognition is just as important in our schedules day to day with kids, and giving them a chance to practice this and know how important it is and even know it by name. So I was with a group of teachers a couple years ago, and I just posed the question, what's comprehension? How would you define it? And we had maybe 20 people in the room, and we got just as many definitions. You can see some of them on this busy chart. What's comprehension? It's a response. It's feeling and understanding text. It's connecting all the pieces. It's making meaning. It's reflective thinking merged with text. It's extracting meaning through reading text, having conversations, and merging new thinking with our life experience. I'm not reading all of them, but you get the idea. I think it's a complicated concept to try to make concrete, and that's why I even thought to write this book in the first place. I think many times we ask kids to make inferences or, dig out the main idea or summarize and synthesize. And we toss those ideas around like they're something kids are instantly able to do, when many kids are suffering from a lack of background knowledge about the text or having trouble decoding the text, or maybe the vocabulary's, beyond their reach at this point. So I think it's good to recognize the complexity of comprehension and what it means to understand something is really it's a layered kind of peel back the onion kind of idea that we'll explore together. This tangram it's hard for you to understand the scale of it, but it was huge pieces on a wooden door. And believe it or not, it was in a music classroom where the music teacher realized that even though the strategies that the content area teachers were using were being, discussed during professional development and everything, she realized that these strategies are also just as important in the music classroom when kids are listening to and interpreting music, when kids are writing or composing music. And so here they are. A lot of people consider these strategies to sort of go together in a way. When the original research came out, it was a meta-analysis from David Pearson. You'll see his name listed as P, the first initial P, David Pearson, in the literature. But they've come to be known as comprehension strategies or thinking strategies or proficient reader strategies. And so I might just refer to them as the thinking strategies while we're together, because I want anyone to know that these strategies are what we use to make meaning as human beings. And so across this series that Kay has designed, we're going to be looking at each of these individually, like I said, for about an hour for each one. And tonight we'll look at metacognition. So here's a concrete model of metacognition that I used with some kids. And we took the cue from author Ellen Keene, who wrote a book called Mosaic of Thought. She refers to metacognition as like an umbrella over the kinds of ways we think. So we took her seriously, and we found an old black umbrella, and I think we used liquid paper to write the word metacognition on the inside and outside of the umbrella. And there are some of the thinking strategies on sentence strips, sloppily masking taped to the inside of that umbrella. We hung it up in the corner of the room. We had been talking with kids about being reflective thinkers, and I think it was maybe 2 weeks after this, the fire marshal came through and made us take it down, darn it. But anyway, I think it served its purpose in giving kids a concrete model of what metacognition is. It's thinking about our own thinking and realizing we use all these different strategies to make meaning of the world. I saw this chart in another classroom, and this teacher talked to her students about how metacognition is really like a frame. It frames all the rest of your thinking. So there are the strategies again on puzzle pieces. The only one missing there is synthesizing. And then I was in a classroom where the teacher had this cloud on the wall, and she referred to metacognition as she compared it to the cloud. And she said to her students, you know how we store all our writing in the cloud? And maybe, your parents have like accounts in the cloud, and you've got like usernames and passwords that are stored in the cloud. Well, it's really the same with metacognition. You upload all of your new thinking, everything that you've ever read or tasted or smelled or experienced. It's like in there, and you can organize it however you want to, but it has unlimited storage, and you can go in and retrieve things when you need them. And thinking about all that, we're going to call that metacognition. So I like giving it a name, Peter Johnston says, notice it and name it. And I even use the word metacognition with little kids, like kindergarten, first grade. Not that that's the most important thing in the world, but sometimes they call it medication for a little while before they get it rolling off their tongue correctly. And then I had a student hand this to me one day, and he said, you know, Mrs. McGregor, it's like this for me. It's almost like you have your regular big brain, but then you have a little mini brain thinking about your big brain. So I thought that was a great model and made me understand that he understands what it means to think about your own thinking. And then I even had we have a gifted learning center in my school district, and one of the students wrote this: is there a word for thinking about metacognition? So I think he was trying to stump me, because if metacognition is thinking about your thinking, then what's the word to describe metacognition if you're thinking about that? So I said, I don't know. Never, that's beyond me. Why don't you just come up with a word and tell me what it is tomorrow when I see you? So when he came back the next day, he said, I'm going to call it metacognition when we're thinking about metacognition. So I think that's perfect. An 8th grade student I was working with, I was in an 8th grade English language arts class. We were using a piece of poetry for our text, and I was teaching them about reflection through annotation in the margins. And so we had talked about metacognition, that there's a name for this, that you can become better at it when you practice. And on his exit ticket that day after the lesson, he wrote, "It's a big deal." And so I found him after class and said, do you mind if I show this to teachers? Because I think it's brilliant. This is exactly what I was hoping you would come away with, that metacognition is a big, big deal. And there are lots of people who can give you, talk about this through a different lens than I can. I'm coming to you as a practitioner in classrooms across grade levels, but we know that the National Academy of Sciences has named metacognition as the key to effective learning. We know that John Hattie's work and Robert Marzano's work, both of them refer to metacognition and let us know about its importance. I love how Marzano calls it the mission control of your thinking process. Now let's try it. So far in this session, I've just been talking a lot, and a lot that I wanted to make sure I communicated in this first session with you, but I like to use the chat. And so just like Einstein says, we've got to experience it a little bit to really know it. So I'm going to give you a quotation on the next screen, and I'll ask you to read it just like you normally would, read it for meaning. But then I'd ask you to also think about what your thinking process is to try to make meaning of it. Like, what strategies are you using? And because I think even though it's one sentence and the reading level is not very high and the vocabulary is not too tough, there's a complexity in this sentence that requires most of us, at least, to use some kind of strategic thinking to unpack the meaning of it. So I will put the quotation on the screen. You can read it, and then I'll wait for about a minute, because I'd love it if everyone, looks like we've got over 50 people here, if everyone could go in the chat and just tell me what strategy you think you're using. Like, are you rereading? Are you visualizing? Whatever comes to mind. So here it is. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. When you're ready, go into that chat. Tell us what it took for you to understand this quote, or at least try to. So some of you have author schema, I guess I could say. Some of you are connecting it to hearing it, with the film or reading it. But lots of other people saying rereading. I feel like for most people, when I've used this before, most people will say, yes, I kicked into rereading mode right away, just like we wish our students would do. I've had people tell me that they went into math mode, that they were visualizing a pie chart or fractions. Some people have told me they grabbed a pen and had to sort of sketch it out to make sense of it. And even others have said, I didn't reread the whole thing, but there were parts of it that I reread. And when I have used this with teachers in person, I'll sometimes put this quotation on the screen for a minute, and people will still be staring at it and rereading it, almost expressionless, for over a minute. And so I like that experience because I think it's a good reminder to us that complexity is sometimes not, it doesn't have anything to do with length or lexile level. I mean, it can, but in this case, it's a reminder that sometimes complexity is there in the ideas. And we all need strategies and, all kinds of situations when the text is beyond our reach. And I let kids know right away that there are plenty of things that I read on a daily basis that I need help with. Maybe it's something I get in the mail from my insurance company, or maybe it's a medical report or something like that, and I need to talk to somebody about it to really understand it. Sometimes rereading isn't going to get it for me. I need some other strategies. So to me, that's what these strategies are about. I don't separate them from learning content. I put them right together. I want kids to learn content because of these strategies. It's not teaching strategies for the sake of teaching strategies. It's so kids can learn and build background knowledge and become curiouser and curiouser. So thank you for engaging in that and putting your comments in the chat. In Comprehension Connections, in the Metacognition chapter, the first concrete lesson is a lesson about the reading salad. If we were together in the same room, I would demonstrate it and we'd try it out a little bit. And in the book, there's a description that is a little more detailed than what I'll give right now, but the gist of it is that you could do some concrete demonstration like this to help kids understand that text and thinking go together. And it's not one or the other. And so when I first designed this lesson, I was working with some kids who were great word callers. Some of them could even read the text out loud, but if you went to talk with them about the text, it was like they hadn't read it at all. Maybe you've had experiences like that with students. The photograph you see on the right-hand side was from one of the first times I ever taught this lesson. The photograph you see on the left-hand side is a reading basket that a teacher made, and she sent me the picture. I believe she was working with 7th grade and 9th grade kids who had plenty of obstacles in their way, and she had a little time with them each day, and they used the reading basket instead of the reading salad. Same idea. But I'll use the golden rule to demonstrate. I don't know if you can see me on your screen, but I'll just tell kids I'm going to point to the text when I'm reading from the text, and I'm going to point to my head when I'm thinking, and I'm going to look really silly, but that's okay. I want you to get that visual in your mind that it's text and thinking and text and thinking, and after a while they start going together and it's messy, and that's what's happening inside your brain, just like a big tossed salad. So if I point to the text, I drop a text card in the salad. Because the cards were red and green, some kids thought it was tomatoes and lettuce. That worked out wonderfully, but that wasn't really my intention. When I point to my head and talk about my thinking, I'll drop in a thinking card. And we'll just keep going. I like to use a picture book to demonstrate it, but my friend who sent me this picture from secondary said, I use it with articles. I use it with online reading. I use it with textbook reading. Anytime we have a new genre that we're using or some kind of text that's really tough for the kids, I'll pull out that reading basket and we're going to slow down the process. And so she would read a little bit and point to the text when she was reading. And then one of the kids would give their thinking, or she would share her thinking about that sentence or about that paragraph. Drop in a thinking card. And for effect, you can even reach in and toss that salad with your hands every once in a while. And so that's what I mean when I say taking some of these abstract concepts and making them concrete for kids. We can tell kids, until we're blue in the face, that they got to be thinking while they read. And sometimes I just think it takes a little bit of realia or concrete objects in the mix to help them really understand, remember, be able to visualize that later. So I'll go back to this for a second. This isn't a one-time lesson. I might use this with kids at the beginning of the year just to get them acquainted with it. And then maybe I'll try it with a piece of poetry a couple months later. And maybe I'll try it with some historical fiction the next week. And so I think it can be used with any genre, and it doesn't have to be a long experience. It could even just be one page in a textbook, or a one-pager about something, a piece of poetry even. So this Venn diagram that I mentioned earlier, we created that right on the heels of this experience. So it was the next day, and we told kids the same idea, it's just a visual. The head was green like the lettuce, and the book was red like the tomatoes, and we said it's the overlap there that makes it meaningful. And I don't know if I had to do over again, I might not say real reading, I might say meaningful reading, but maybe that's semantics. But I guess I want kids just to know that their thinking really does matter. That's the important part. So there's this book, not written for a teacher audience specifically, but a really great book for teachers nonetheless, written by Chip and Dan Heath. They're brothers, and they wrote this book and many others, but this is my favorite. It's called Made to Stick, and it has this nice faux piece of duct tape on the front. It actually has a texture to it like real duct tape. But in this book, the Heath brothers talk about how if you want to make something sticky, if you want to teach somebody something and you want it to stay around for a while so that they're thinking about it, you've got to make it simple at first. Got to make it concrete in some way. And if you can add an element of the unexpected, that's even better. And they have, I think, maybe 3 more different ways that you can help make your ideas sticky. I picked up this book at a Barnes and Noble bookstore because I was attracted to the subtitle, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. That really piqued my curiosity. And so the book, though, is perfect for teachers because, after all, isn't that what we're doing every day, is trying to get some ideas to survive for a little while in the minds of our students. So this book really backs up the structure of Comprehension Connections, because in every chapter, I'm trying to make it simple and concrete and approach these strategies in a way that's not so, predictable, like worksheet based or paper pencil, but using concrete objects and using some sensory experiences to help kids get to know their own thinking even better. Rick Wormley says it like this, and I love this quotation: "There is nothing in the K-12 curriculum that's so symbolic or abstract that we could not create a physical comparison that would sharpen students' understanding." So there's nothing you teach that you can't make concrete with just a little bit of thought. Perhaps you have heard, let me think of her name here for a second. It's escaping me. It'll come back to me in a moment. There's a person who has worked with Harvard's Project Zero and the Visible Thinking Project, who has said that specifically in social studies that you want to try to use concrete objects to make, kids have those hooks where they can connect the new to the known. And oh man, her name is on the tip of my tongue. If I don't think of it during this session, then I'm going to make sure I put it into an email to you later, or to Kay. Sorry about that. So in every single chapter of the book Comprehension Connections, there are some thinking stems. And this one is the chart that goes with metacognition, and it's just basic ways to talk about our thinking. I'm thinking, I'm noticing, I'm wondering, I'm seeing, I'm feeling. I use thinking stems all the time. I rarely teach a lesson without having thinking stems present. I just let's see, it was yesterday, and it was also with Greenup County, 4th and 5th grade teachers. We were working on inferring, and I think we had 12 4th and 5th grade classes joining us on a Google Meet yesterday in Greenup. But I gave the thinking stems to the teachers about making inferences and asked them to post them in the room while we were working together. It seems like such a simple thing, but I've had teachers tell me, like, Tanny, out of everything in Comprehension Connections, the thinking stems are the things that really made the most difference with my kids because it helped them talk about their thinking, and it gave them confidence that they can use this to start talking about something and they're on the right track. And of course, the thinking stem, I'm noticing, that's my favorite one, I believe. One thing that I dropped into the Google resource folder that we have is this Harvard 2-pager. If you print it, it's 2 pages. It's called Interrogating Texts, 6 Reading Habits to Develop in Your First Year at Harvard. It's one of my favorite articles to use with intermediate and secondary students. If you don't know about it already, check it out. It's something you could build a lesson around with your students. Maybe even a good idea to use it in January when you come back from break. But it's just 6 ways that this Harvard librarian, Susan Gilroy, has recommended for us as readers to really get to know a text. And there's simple things like previewing the text, reading with a pen in your hand, all of that. All of them, to me, encourage metacognition. They encourage reflection. They encourage getting to know yourself as a thinker, as a reader, as a writer. And that's just one of my favorite articles. So if you took time to read it, it would really only just take you about 10 or 15 minutes. But I think each and every one of these habits would be a great one to emphasize and just sort of explore with your students to encourage metacognitive behaviors in them. There are a couple other concrete ways that I've explored encouraging kids to be metacognitive. One is the use of paint chip cards. And of course, you can get these free at a hardware store. You're probably not supposed to take as many of them as I have taken during my lifetime, but you can always just go to another hardware store if they get to know you at one. So anyhow, I used these with some kids, and I was partner teaching, and the teacher and I both used a paint chip card to model our thinking. So I said to kids, you know, I want you to know about me that even though I went to high school and I have a college degree and I even went to graduate school, I still struggle through some things I read. And there are some things I read that I'm fluent and I just enjoy it and it's no trouble at all. But then there are other things that really get me down. And it's like a continuum, just like these gradients of color on the paint chip card. So for example, that first one up there that they call Normandy Gray, I might say, you know, if I'm reading a magazine that I pick up at the grocery store or at the airport, that's probably going to be pretty easy reading for me. And I'm going to know most of the vocabulary, and, you know, there might be articles in there about relationships or health or something like that. And I can just sit back and enjoy it. But sometimes there might be something I pick up where I feel like it's right in the middle for me. And for me, that was reading Harry Potter books. Like the first one, I don't know what it was. Books that have a lot of characters introduced quickly, I have trouble with that. Or if the vocabulary is a little unfamiliar, I might say that I'm in the middle somewhere. And then there are other things where I'm in a deep, dark fog and I know it. And it might be I'm reading something in a law journal or a medical journal. One of my daughters went to law school, and when she was in law school, she'd have me proofread some of her papers just for, structure and spelling and punctuation and that. But I was lost as far as content went on most of them. So that happens to all of us. And that, you shouldn't create your reading identity in your mind based upon where you think you are on this continuum with one kind of text, because we're all over the place. And And I think that's good for kids to know. And that's metacognition in action, realizing that about yourself. I included this even though it was with second graders. And I know that most of you are teachers of older kids, but it might be something fun to do. I made a huge thinking bubble, and I had a teacher partner sit next to me, and she read out loud from a nonfiction piece, and I put my head in that thinking bubble and did the thinking out loud. So she was reading from the text and I was thinking, and we modeled that for the kids, and they couldn't wait to try it out themselves. So probably the silliest thing I ever did with metacognition, but it was memorable, that's for sure. I also want to show you, and I know we just have a few minutes left, I want to show you an example from a younger student just to prove that even our kids who are in elementary school can have a grasp of what this is all about. And if that's true, then how much more powerful it can be when our kids get older and they're grappling with more complex ideas. So I was in a first grade classroom, and the teacher gave a graphic organizer like this to her students. And she just said, you know, we've been talking about our thinking a lot. And she had done the reading salad with them, and I think used paint chip cards. She said, I want you to go back to your seats, get your marker box out, and show me, what does it look like inside your head when you are thinking about your thinking and really reading something for meaning? And there were a lot of great examples. Here are a couple. A wire and another wire sticking together makes the reading. And here's another one, real deep thinking, where the boy said, when you're really reading and thinking about your thinking, it's like you have an iPad plugged into your brain. And so he has that book dangling out of the back of his brain with a cord, which I thought was great. And he even wrote the word metacognition and almost spelled it right at the top. So I think these conversations can be had with kids of any age. It makes no difference if you're going to use the word metacognition or not, but the conversations about thinking and reflecting about your thinking, that's what's important. I even like to sing little songs. I drop these lyrics into the folder that we have. I think I can think about thinking. Do you understand what I said? It's all about metacognition. What's going on in my head? And so they're all to familiar tunes. So if you like to sing with kids, it's another sometimes silly feeling way, you know, to get kids to remember the name of the strategy and what it does for us. Now, when we were together, if you were there in person with me a few weeks back in Lexington, I shared with you that I had an experience with a team from South Korea where they were researching metacognition. Mr. Park, he's the man in the photograph on the left. He has a light blue shirt on. Over to the right of that photograph, he and his team came to the United States to interview some folks at universities who were doing some work about metacognition and memory and retention. And so he ended up in Cincinnati with his team and watched a lesson about metacognition. You can see that Venn diagram right there. And I used a toolbox. It's sitting on the desk in the photograph on the right under the videographer. And so Mr. Park and his team made this documentary for Korean Broadcasting System. And after they had finished, a couple weeks later, I communicated with him via email, and he said that they found that when it comes to thinking about your thinking deeply about what you're reading and hearing, slowing down sometimes accomplishes more than speeding up. And that if you can put some little spaces in your teaching routine or in your cycle of teaching and learning in your classroom, it can be more effective than moving so fast and cramming in as much as you can. So I think most of us would agree we knew this before tonight, just from experience, but it was great to hear that from him and his team, that those were the conclusions that they came to as well. So I'm going to stop here for a moment. Again, I'm going to ask you to go into the chat. I know time's of the essence, but I'd like for you to go into the chat one more time. What is something from this evening's, it's dark outside here now, so I'm going to call it evening. What's something from this evening's session that you think is important, something you think you'll try? Why do you think metacognition even matters? You can respond to any of those things. I'd especially just love to know what you're thinking about as in terms of one thing that you might try with your kids. Or If you have something you already do that connects with this topic, please share it with us as well in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll be able to see the chat more easily and see a few of you too. And we'll end our session in just a couple of minutes, but please go into the chat first.
They're over down the table.
I'm seeing thinking stems mentioned over and over.
Hey, Tanny, may I make a request?
Oh, sure.
So I kind of I listed all the books and the article that you mentioned in the other resources on the agenda. But I
Great.
also kind of listed some of the strategies you suggested, like reading salad, the paint chip cards, the thought bubble that the little girl wore,
Right.
and the little boy with the visual representation. Could you put those pictures, a picture of each of those in that shared Google folder so that they have a picture to go with those ideas?
Yes,
to
I
remind
can.
them?
I can for most of them if I have permission.
Okay.
You know, if it's something that's published in my book, I can easily share it.
Right. What about the little boy's head? Is that something that you could share that they could
Oh
use?
yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, so if we could put
Absolutely.
those in there, then I've got them listed here, and then they have access to using those things, or it might remind them they'll have a visual, what kind of like what we've been talking about. They'll have a visual to
Absolutely.
go with the comment.
Yep, I have some office hours tomorrow, so I'll do that.
Thank you.
And by the way, I just looked it up, and so that researcher that I was trying to think of her name, who has written specifically about social studies teachers and how using realia or objects is really important. Her name is Sherry Tishman, and I'm going to type the spelling into the chat so that you can see it. And there's even an article that she wrote that appeared in Educational Leadership. I'm going to see if I can come up with the title for that real quickly, and we'll put that in the chat too.
And I will add those things to our agenda. I like to put everything on there so that if they go back and look at it later.
Perfect. I love it. I love how you facilitate sessions actively like that. And it makes it so much easier when you're teaching to have someone do that. So thank you.
My thinking is that when oftentimes I'm in a PD and I think, oh, I want to use that. And then I can't find it, or I don't remember, even if I'm taking notes. So if it's all in one place, everybody has access to it and they can go back and revisit it.
Yes.
And then I can take the notes for you all and you all don't have to.
Well, I'll also find tomorrow when I'm adding some of these things in, I'll put the Sherry Tishman article that I'm referring to in there because it's really a good one. She talks about using it's either a shoehorn or something she used when she was darning a sock. I don't remember, but it was just like one of these basic concrete items to launch a lesson with, and it's exactly what I try to do in Comprehension Connections. So thank you, everybody. I'm looking through exit slips, and thank you for people who are saying some things were useful. I hope so. And yeah, Joshua, I love what you said, pushing your brain to think more about your process of thinking intentionally. That only turns around to help us be stronger instructors when we know our own thinking better. So I think it's and Jessica, wow, what an interesting comment. Jessica says, I taught in Korea for years, and I agree that giving students time to slow down and think matters so much. That's awesome. I haven't taught in Korea, but I did teach in China for a short assignment through University of Cincinnati, and I found that to be true as well, and that my students, who were mostly in their late teens, early 20s, really treasured the opportunities to get to talk about their thinking and share their thinking with each other. So thank you, everybody, so much. We're back together again in January, same time frame, 4:30 to 5:30. I'm going to find that date really quickly. And it is January 19th, and it's a Thursday.
And if I was going to say, if you'll recall the umbrella she did with all the different things that she had in that umbrella that fell under metacognition, each of those items is the focus of one of our next sessions.
Yep. And it's the
They all,
same.
so we're going to tie it all together. All of those things that fell under that umbrella of metacognition, we're going to do sessions on those in this 6-part series. So,
Yep. And it's not that you use these strategies one at a time in isolation. I mean, you can when you're practicing them, but we use them interchangeably. And it's just like a tapestry of using these strategies. And so to strengthen each one of them individually helps us overall with our thinking. So when we get to that very last session and we're talking about summarizing and synthesizing, we're going to put it all together. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kay.
well, thank you. I was thinking, and I typed this in the chat, but I always had those students who were like, I read, that you could hear them read and they read pretty fluently, but they couldn't remember or understand what they were reading. And I think it goes back to that thinking, reading salad that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be a great lesson for those kids. And I know some of you all probably had those students as well. Who,
now, I've had that same conversation with high school teachers and elementary school teachers. And somehow, and I think we have to point the finger back at ourselves sometimes, we push through groups of kids who think that reading fast is the answer. Or if you can read out loud and sound really well and educated and pronounce the words correctly, that's what good reading is. And we don't emphasize the thinking simultaneously with all those things.
and one of the things that I did for a lot of those kids, I found if they could hear it and read it along at the same time, that helped them. But I never had put the thought together that maybe doing a lesson like that, reading salad, would really be helpful to them, to show them I got to stop and think. And I think sometimes as teachers we miss that, and by the time I got them they were juniors in high school. But I think sometimes we miss that because they can read and sound good, and so we assume that because they can do that they understand.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, true. Or they do the assignment, or yep, I read that, what's next? But there wasn't much thinking merged into it. So
yes. Well, thank you so much,
All
Tanny. This has
right.
been a great session. It's
Well,
given us
thank you
things
so
to
much.
think about, and super, super wonderful session. So
All
we
right.
appreciate your time.
Well, you can look for some additional photographs like Kay requested sometime tomorrow in the folder. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.